Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. Let's talk about pricing and cost of things, affordability, big topic. 2025, middle of a new decade after all the disastrous events of 2020. Remember, I wrote a book on all this stuff called The Gunfighter's Guide to Business. And I refer to it to kind of say, here are some statements I made about business in general and economies on a large scale to consider from a different point of view. Different because a lot of the thoughts of the past, there just isn't a good representation. Not enough. There hasn't been enough defenders of capitalism in American culture, even though it's supposed to be our main thing. There's a lot of corrosive elements of thought that emerged into our economic and business culture. And that certainly is the case when it comes to pricing. And so when we're talking about affordability and prices of everything going up and up and up, this is the result that was said years ago when we warned about this desire Democrats had to have a minimum wage increase, because they went out and they bumped everything up, and they were lobbying in the late part of last decade to have McDonald's pay $15 an hour and Walmart and everybody else $15 an hour, and you artificially mess with the wage rates. So what you've done is you created inflation, because until you really get the cost of goods aligned to what the cost of labor should be, the cost of labor is the value of whatever someone is willing to pay for the goods and services produced by that labor. You can't artificially inflate it. And then the pass off, the belief by Democrats was that corporations who put themselves out there, or business owners who put themselves out there to make a product, and they take all the risk, and they go out and produce something and they hire labor for it, that they would take from the profits and to transfer that wealth over to the workers. So it's this whole communist idea. So when you're out there talking about price increases for things, you're artificially always inflating the system and what the true demand is for that thing. So another thing I warn in my book a lot is about consultants. So consultants that are in every industry, and they come in on the backs of someone who's been successful and done something, and they try to reintroduce ideas, and then they justify everything with price increases. And so everybody says the same thing. It's a very easy thing to do, to say, well, you want to improve your margin, just raise your prices. Well, that's how you screwed up this whole thing, when you threw labor with artificial inflation by raising the minimum wage. Then everybody above that, next tier jobs, career type jobs, not just starting jobs, they all had to go up too. So now you've got all these wage rates that are really high, and now you have to somehow create a margin. The only way you can create the margin is raise your prices to meet the need, and you've totally screwed up the entire system. And that's what we're dealing with. And when you're talking about affordability, this is the impact of all those wage increases that did not work, driven by market needs. They are driven by political imposition and burdening wage issuers in favor of wage earners, and without the true value being developed correctly. It was government tampering that caused all these wage rates. So everybody out there would like to say, hey, we gave you more money and got you a higher minimum wage. And now, but all the cost of goods went up, because now everyone who makes stuff has to pay all those extra high wages. And after COVID really wrecked the system, all the consultants out there can only think of is, well, raise your prices. Raise your prices. Everybody has to raise their prices, because once you've done that, you've validated the fraud, and you've essentially created this monstrosity of economic burden that the system itself isn't valued. So if everything reset itself, if everybody raises their prices to meet a higher wage rate that was artificially imposed by the power of government, well, all you've done is just shifted money around and changed the value in a spreadsheet. The value is the value. It's still the same thing. The money you earn still buys the same amount of goods out there because everybody raised their prices. So the reason why you have the affordability problem is because essentially Democrats push for minimum wage increases, and the market had to respond, especially in COVID when they took away labor. So people were throwing huge amounts of money at labor to get them to come back to work because they were all working from home, and the whole system got screwed up by more government interference, keeping people working from home and not getting back out in the business. And fast food restaurants were closing their dining rooms because they didn't have anybody to cover the staffing, and they started throwing money at these people to get people to come back to work. More government tampering, and we're seeing now the result of all those price increases. So if you're trying to be a reasonable business and hold your prices down, if you look at other cultures, especially the Japanese culture, I deal with Japanese a lot, and so the value of a thing, you should always be looking to get the most value for the least cost. So how do you take out cost? Well, you have maybe higher quality people, but fewer of them doing a goods and service. One thing that they talk about in lean manufacturing a lot is driving your costs down. When you're a cost plus structure, where the assumption, this is where consultants come into it, again, everybody's looking for the easy buck. They assume government contracts mean you can always just perpetually raise your prices, and everybody can just raise their rates, and the government will keep paying for it. Government contracts will just keep jacking it up. And ultimately, that means more budgets, more congressional allocations, and you get all these perpetually the price increases. Everyone will just go raise their prices, and the whole thing will balance out. And that was always the assumption. That wasn't the case. Meanwhile, you're competing in a world that is trying to drive prices down, like in Japanese culture. They simply lean is all about driving out those costs. And when you look at companies that are doing really well, the next generation kind of manufacturing, like SpaceX represents, they are taking much more of a Japanese model than an American cost plus model. And so all the consultants are missing it. Most everybody's out there looking to raise prices so they can pay for their consulting fees. And then, of course, you're going to have to raise your prices in order to pay for their services. And you find that in every field of endeavor, from manufacturing to food producers. If you're dealing with money, you're dealing with somebody who's out there trying to throw a cost plus model at it in the wake of all these destructive trends that emerged after COVID, or before and during COVID, where they raised the minimum wage. And it might look good on paper. You might get more on your paycheck, but it goes out and buys less because everybody had to raise their rates in order to pay for that rate increase. And so you just had a lot of government tampering that wasn't driven by real true market value. Now, I'm not against price increases. I usually pay extra money for a lot of things I get because I value the service. Like I like to go to Barnes & Noble several times a week and buy books. And they might be 30% more than if I bought it on Amazon. But I like to go pick up the physical book and buy it at the physical store because I like the convenience and speed of it. Probably the most expensive meal I've ever paid for is I took my wife to dinner at Chef Ramsay's restaurant in Chelsea, in London. His signature restaurant, and I think it was like a $4,500 meal, and it was for four of us that were there: my daughter, her husband, my wife, and me. And we had a very nice meal. I knew it was going to be expensive, and we didn't care. It was for my wife. It was her birthday, and she loves Chef Ramsay, and we had great quality food. And again, it's his best of his best, and it was a great. And I didn't mind paying the $4,500 for that meal. And there's other restaurants around town, around the Cincinnati area, that when you want to enjoy something that's has the brand of quality, you don't mind paying for it. I know people who charge I think $45 for a 2-paragraph text. If you ask them as a consultant, hey, what should I do with my life? What's my horoscope mean today? They charge you $45 because people value their opinion. They charge a lot of money for it, and people are willing to pay for that. So be it. But it's when you're forced to pay for something that doesn't have very high quality value, that's where you start getting all kinds of inflated issues that wreck your system, and then you have an affordability problem. I had no problem paying that much money for that Chef Ramsay experience, and we got a tour of the kitchen and everything, and it was really well done, and it was one of those experiences we'll always value. It should have had to cost $4,500. We enjoyed it, so it was worth the money to us. Is it something that everybody would want to go out there and do? Probably not. It's driven by market value. So when people are willing to pay a higher price for something through the efforts of capitalism, that's one thing. But like I've also said, because I've heard a lot of these consultants say, gotta raise your prices, gotta raise your prices, gotta raise your prices. Well, are you gonna raise your prices for a McDonald's experience? I mean, according to, or in conjunction with Chef Ramsay's restaurant? I mean, should everything cost a lot of money because everybody has a right to raise prices and get a fair wage? That's where you get this Marxism behind the whole system. McDonald's makes a McDonald's hamburger, and if you're on the go and you want something fast and kind of tasty, you can stop by and get a cheap meal. Or you could go spend $4,000 on a really, really fancy dinner. It's all food, but you're willing to pay more for one experience or the other based on the brand quality. But one brand isn't offering the other brand the same things. You're not buying off this brand. If you're going to charge high prices, then your brand better be able to back it up. You can't just impose it on and say, well, it's fair. Everybody has their fair share coming. We're struggling. We're a struggling business. You got to pay a lot of extra money to accommodate our waste. One thing they do in Japanese culture is they drive waste out of the system so the customers don't have to pay for it. That's why Toyota's always been so successful. Or you get any kind of Japanese product and you have a feeling that what you're getting has more value because you know that their culture pushed the waste out of it. As opposed to saying, well, we have a lot of waste in our culture, you need to pay more money to cover it up so we can make a decent margin, which is essentially what's going on with the affordability problem. That's essentially what it comes down to. All the businesses out there that are trying to deal with minimum wage increases and other cost of goods and supply chain disruptions where everything's gone on expedite because lead times have been crushed because union workers weren't dealt with on the ports as goods come from overseas, or we found out we couldn't deal with communist countries and we started moving things around. And anytime you start having tampering of market forces, and the reaction to that is price increases because everybody's trying to accommodate their losses, you're not dealing with a quality product anymore. You're dealing with throwing money at the waste. You're putting lots of waste into it and then trying to cover the gap with all the waste you're imposed on, like minimum wage increases. You're dealing with waste. You're not driving waste out of your product. And so your brand is now carrying lots of waste, and you're asking your customers to pay for the waste because it got thrown on you and you didn't manage it out. And that's been the temptation that consultants have been giving to all these manufacturers right now. And they're all telling manufacturers the same thing. You've got your fair share coming. Prices have gone up everywhere. Not to address the reason why prices have gone up, which really, if you peel it back, it comes down to minimum wage increases and the cost of labor being artificially pushed too high by a liberalized government that wasn't being driven by market forces. So cost of goods went up, so everybody raises your prices and justify the nonsense. And you're chasing inflation, essentially. And that's why you have affordability problems. If you want to get it down, you got to take all the nonsense out of it, and so that you can get back to a baseline that's driven by market forces. And then you'll know what your cost is. And if you really want to raise your prices, then you got to produce a quality product, but you got to be a quality brand. You got to be a brand that people will say, you know what, I'll pay that extra money because I want to have that experience, because that brand means something to me. But if you're just a pay for less shoe store or a dollar store, you don't go in there and start throwing around $1,000 bills. You go in there, you pay your dollar, you get your bag of chips or a new Slinky or something, and you don't pay top dollar for it. You're trying to get a bargain price because that's what the brand represents. You can't just keep raising prices on everybody because you've thrown all this inefficiency at the system, government imposed, and they've micromanaged things into disasters, and then they expect everybody else to pay for them. And then the consultants come on and say, well, you got to pay our fees, so raise your prices. And our suggestion to you is just raise your prices, because you got all this government intervention, and who can fight the government? So you just raise your prices, and like everybody else is. And in that way, you deal with this mass chaos, and you have a bunch of dumb people giving everybody a bunch of dumb advice on a system that was dumb to begin with, and no one's going back and fixing the real problem. And so if you really want to deal with the affordability problem and bring costs back down, you got to get the minimum wage back under control. You got to get the cost of labor truly where it deserves to be. You can't have too much government intervention driving prices up, because the cost of regulation is one of those hidden fees that customers aren't willing to pay for, and you impose it on your businesses. And what are they going to do to deal with it? Their consultants are going to tell them, raise your prices. And everyone's raising prices without having any real justification for doing so. When other cultures in the world are driving costs down because they're taking waste out, and then you're competing with them on a global market. So that's a lot of things there to consider when you're talking about affordability, but it all comes down to allowing market forces to drive prices where they need to be, and not imposing them with a bunch of goofy rules so politicians get elected and say, we raise your minimum wage. Not to mention that the cost of your bag of chips went up, but at least on paper you get more money, so elect us again. That's not how it's supposed to be. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. And remember, I wrote the book on this stuff. People should read it and get some lessons that are well founded. I think they'll enjoy it a lot if you give yourself a chance to get knowledge and you get out of the bubble that all these consultants try to put you in, because they don't have very good advice. If they were really good at it, they'd be doing businesses on their own instead of trying to leech off people who actually go out there and take the risk. And then they try to collect money off the uncertainty. Not a good model, and I talk about it extensively in my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business. I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.